Bunker Hill Community College is inspiring dreams through academic excellence, community engagement, and workforce partnerships. Learn more at bhcc.edu.
Right now on Rooted, we're looking at a growing national crisis, the federal government's failure to uphold protections for survivors of violence and trauma. Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Campbell is taking the Department of Justice to court, challenging illegal restrictions and funding rollbacks under the Violence Against Women Act and Victims of Crime Act. Attorney General Campbell, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So first, just lay it out. How did we get here?
We elected the wrong person. No, I will just take a step back. I've been stressing that the work we're doing to hold this federal administration accountable, including for services for victims of all types of crimes, it's not personal. It's accountability, and that's what we do, protecting our residents and all of the investments that come to Massachusetts to help folks, including victims. And frankly, what's at stake across the country is billions of dollars, and right here in Massachusetts, over $5 million for different purposes. And so we are holding them accountable by filing lawsuits. It's our most impactful tool, our litigation tool. And we have two in this VOCA, victim advocate, victim services space, with the goal of getting resources to Massachusetts folks who desperately need it.
Now, just a couple days after this multi-state lawsuit was filed, the Department of Justice did drop some of the conditions that it was imposing in terms of directing these funds to states that weren't complying with its immigration policies. But what exactly is the status right now?
So we have two lawsuits. Both are ongoing. One, we're waiting for a hearing date, but all positive, and I would say they're working. And so as you mentioned, one of the lawsuits we have, the DOJ has come to us and said we will release some of this funding, which is over $1 million, and let some of those conditions go, which is a positive. And so we're continuing to work at it with the hopes that they let all conditions go and that they allow us not only to disperse funds to organizations all across the Commonwealth and to victims directly, but also to make sure that anyone who is a victim of crime, regardless of their status, regardless of where they live in the state, that they get the services they're entitled to and that they need.
Are there, though, specific things that can make it harder to help victims of crime, such as domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, who are also undocumented?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a posture from this administration that would suggest that all immigrants, for example, are criminals. That's nonsense. We know by data, by stories, immigrants here in Massachusetts are working sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, and they're also victims of crime. And frankly, regardless of what status you currently have, if you come to our great state and are harmed by someone, we should hold you accountable. Law enforcement also needs to continue to build trust, which they're doing, with folks in these various immigrant communities. Why? Because they report crime. So if someone is harmed by someone in our state, I would want them not only to be held accountable, but also for the person who was harmed and the victim of that crime to come forward so that no one else is harmed by the person who committed the act.
And help us understand, just beyond the personal story or the personal experience of someone who may be a victim of one of these crimes, what's the economic impact for the state if these funds don't come through?
I think it's twofold. One is if we just look at immigrant communities as a whole and just say focus on our Haitian population, right now under significant threat in so many different ways, and not only as victims, but also because of the rhetoric and policy of this administration. If you were to deport, for example, every single Haitian who is in Massachusetts, our elder care service, our PCA service for all of our folks who are within their homes that need care, that would be dismantled overnight. So the economic impact is significant. And then for the organizations that receive funding from all of these different various forms of legislation to have an impact, I brought numbers. So just in fiscal year 2025, we had over $4 million go to close to 1,000 claimants, victims. And then, of course, nearly $17.6 million to over 95 victim service organizations, which leads to thousands more being helped and serviced by nonprofits that were already struggling. So it's meaningful impact for anyone who's ever been a victim of crime in this state. And of course, they get the services they so desperately need.
Now, earlier in the show, we talked to a number of survivors here at the Rooted Roundtable, including Shakira Robinson, Keith Maskell, and Kenai Andrews. And of course, Shakira and Kenai both work in the space where they're directly providing direct assistance to survivors. And they both talked about this crabs in the barrel mentality that we know exists in so many sectors in Massachusetts, especially when it comes to nonprofits, and how there's already a competition for the resources that are available. So how might that be worsened if these funds are rescinded or decreased?
So many folks are jealous of our state because we have such a robust nonprofit sector and philanthropic community. And what we saw is, yes, that mentality can exist, but I would actually say post-COVID, you have nonprofit leaders coming together even more to push back on that narrative and to hopefully work in collaboration and partnership. And they're certainly doing it now. They're recognizing that victims need services, right? And if anything, they're repurposing sometimes their mission to be able to provide greater services where funding may be more restricted. They're thinking outside the box and creating new sources of funding and being creative around that. They're sharing best practices. So what are you doing now in this moment in time, specifically in the immigration community or immigration context in migrant community to help our folks? And these ideas are helping and reaching more people. So actually, I give credit to nonprofit leaders during this moment in time, especially those with their own personal, powerful stories, who are stepping up in the face of pushback from a federal administration, working in collaboration with us, doing the work on the ground to reach more people.
What else do you think can be done on the policy end of this? Like, for instance, we know that men and immigrants, for instance, are vulnerable. Men are another population that we don't always think of as victims.
That's
Are there
right.
things that we should be doing to specifically target these more vulnerable populations?
I would say, one, just our narrative. Men certainly are victims, and of course, there are certain communities, whether it's poorer communities, communities of color, immigrants who are most vulnerable to what we're talking about. And there are organizations and nonprofits on a regular basis, frankly, creating special initiatives and special programming for populations, including men, that require funding. And so my job is to fight for that funding, to make sure it continues to come to Massachusetts. And so far, our litigation and lawsuits are working. And then to get creative within our state to create more opportunities for funding, even through our own office, putting out a gun violence prevention grant, which the office had never done before, for $1 million through a public health model and lens to be able to reach more people and to have a greater impact with our organizations.
Now, we know that the state is coming off the heels of an emergency shelter crisis, where we had a huge influx of migrants, many of them Asian migrants, into the state, overloading our emergency shelter system. It sounds like, there have been some things done to even that out a little bit, but earlier this year, there were reports and concerns about crime that was happening within these emergency shelters. Do you think that the DOJ and the Trump administration could use this as fuel to their fire in wanting to rescind these funds?
I think they're using anything and everything, and much of it not based in fact, a lot of misinformation. And just the narrative around immigrants is painful to hear. To suggest that every immigrant is a criminal, when in many instances they are the victims of crime. And because they're most vulnerable to crime, there are people out there planning and plotting to scam them out of their money, including lawyers who are taking advantage of folks within our immigrant communities as they're trying to seek their status for asylum or TPS or something else. And we're seeing that, and we're holding those folks accountable. This is the time, frankly, to be more intentional about our resources and to have an impact. What I love about being in government is that government can be positive. It can have an impact. It can reduce cycles of violence and crime. And yet we don't have a federal partner looking to do that work with us, instead to demonize people. So we have an opportunity to shift that.
And so if you know that they are going to use that, how do you defend the state against that argument?
We get out there through every channel we can to lift up what is happening in our immigrant communities in particular, but most importantly, these nonprofit organizations that you mentioned that are doing incredible work, even in the hardest and most challenging times we've probably seen in this country in a really long time. They are still delivering services. They are still, even through MOVA at the state level, still meeting victims where they are, still bringing about trauma-informed care, still funding burial services, still making sure those who are surviving domestic violence and have the courage to come forward have access to housing, workforce development opportunities, and so much more. So if anything, I'm aligning with these organizational leaders to do the work and making sure through our litigation efforts, we're bringing them the resources they so desperately need and deserve.
Now, of course, when people are leaving the emergency shelters, the hope is that they can find housing, they can find jobs. But it's tough here in Massachusetts. And we know that a lack of housing, a lack of income are things that lead to people perpetrating things like domestic violence or falling into those abusive situations. So what else does the state need to do? And of course, I know you're the state's top criminal justice person, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily a policymaker, but what can be done on a holistic level to make sure that those things are in place so that people don't have to resort to crime to sustain a life here?
So while I may be the chief law enforcement officer for the state, I view my job as being bigger than just enforcing the law. So enforcing law currently tells me file those lawsuits and get our money for victims from the federal level, and of course continue to push at the state level. But on the policy front, we also have a role to play there. I think it's redefining what public safety is. People often just view public safety as policing, and actually discounting the work of all first responders, including nonprofit leaders that show up at the beginning, at the outset of a crime to help victims. They're first responders too. But we add a public health lens to the work because, to your point, we can break cycles of violence if we are addressing poverty, helping people build wealth, helping them get the wages they deserve through our Fair Labor Division, doing our housing work to bring about better housing. We just had a historic settlement out in Springfield, not forgetting folks in Western Mass and other parts of the state that are living in some of the most awful conditions, a $10 million settlement to help renters out there. So we are doing the root causes, right, addressing the root causes, the red flags, and all of the symptoms of violence at the same time that we're holding those who are perpetuating violence in our communities accountable. So it's twofold. It's a large, expansive portfolio of work, but it's meaningful because why can't we imagine, as someone recently said, Father Boyle from Los Angeles, a community where you don't need police departments, where you don't need prisons, where everyone feels safe in their home, in their community, and in Massachusetts.
I hear this. I think it's a goal that we all want to achieve.
Yeah.
We also know that the Trump administration is threatening to send the National Guard into communities and cities that don't comply with its immigration enforcement laws. Are you worried about the National Guard coming here?
Yes, because I am prepared for everything. I remain in contact with folks in Oregon, Illinois, Chicago, as well as California, Los Angeles. It's the Democratic AGs across the country working together. And if they were to come to Massachusetts, and I hope the National Guard does not come, we will certainly be ready and prepared.
What does that preparedness look like?
It's drafting a lot of documents. It's working with a whole host of stakeholders, including our governor, our executive Office of Public Safety and Security, our law enforcement, municipal leaders all across the Commonwealth. So many, because you can't go into court just looking young and fabulous, right? You have to bring an argument. And what we're seeing is most of the time they are releasing the National Guard and under unlawful conditions, suggesting they are needed when they're not. Local law enforcement here in Massachusetts can do their jobs exceptionally well. National Guard is for emergency purposes. Leave them for the emergencies, not to come in and undermine public trust, undermine the work that local law enforcement has done, and most importantly, to perpetuate fear. That's the last thing we need.
So, of course, this conversation has more broadly focused on crime survivors. And I think so often, especially when we think about human trafficking or sexual assault or domestic violence and abuse, it's something that happens in the shadows. We as everyday people are like, it's horrible, but what can I do about it? What do you think everyday citizens in Massachusetts can do to help?
It is everywhere. It's in the municipality in which you live. So whether we're talking about family violence or domestic violence, it's in a home near you. It's in a workplace, possibly. Even through some of our human trafficking division work, which connects, of course, to victim services. We just had some major cases involving massage parlors and a brothel, places where you probably go to get services to make you feel better, where folks are being harmed and trafficked. It is, sadly, a business that involves billions of dollars. And so we'll continue to do that accountability work, yet everyone should be mindful of that and never suggest it's just poor people or people of color or immigrant communities. It is everybody.
Well, Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell, thank you so very much for the work that you do and for having this conversation here on Rooted.
Thank you for having me.
We're proud to partner with Bunker Hill Community College, powering Boston's future workforce through access, equity, and innovation in higher education. Thank you for supporting Rooted and the future of public media. Click the link in the description or visit bhcc.edu to learn more.